All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, whichever part of the world you are in listening to this talk, or when will you be listening to this recorded conversation. Welcome to Leaders in Library Season 4. And I have the second guest of the season. Uh, Before we get started and talk about a book that she has picked up, let me formally introduce her. I know her for a while now. We got acquainted as strangers on the LinkedIn platform. And today we have grown to become good friends and we work together on certain work. So let me introduce the guest of the day. Welcome, Sheila. Sheila is the Senior Director, Learning and Development for Teleperformance, which is one of the leading global leaders in the outsourcing and offshoring consulting business. They're present across, name the country, and you have their offices there. What I know of her from the time I started interacting with her and Sheila, this is a compliment from my side to you directly, is absolutely very enthusiastic learning and development professional with amazing sense of attention for detail. And the reason is on all those conversations, she would go to the last nuts and bolts to even figure out can we take the next step or go to the next level of decision. So that's the kind of person that she is. Uh, I'm safely assuming that she's also a book lover like me. And today we're going to talk about a very, very powerful book written by a great author, one of the leading American authors, brothers who have written this book. And I'm very excited to have you on this show. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation, Sheila.
Thank you so much, Rajiv, and I resonate the same feeling. I think, yes, we started off as strangers. We knew each other on a platform, and I think every time, I've reached a comfort level where, while in terms of our work, our association has brought us together a little bit, but more than that, I think as individuals from the same fraternity,
Yeah.
my comfort level in terms of connecting with you, bouncing off an idea, etc., is it's very comforting to know that there's somebody who can give me a perspective. So I think it's
Thank you.
in that sense been a very, very, for the brief period that we've known each other, it's been very, very interesting.
Thank you so much. I think the appreciation and respect is very, very mutual. So I'm going to get started straight away and jump into the first question without wasting any time. So the first one, tell me, how did books happen to you? When did you get into this habit of reading? Tell me a little verse.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean, I come from a Tam Bram family, and I was living with my grandparents. So we were in a joint family. So every
Mhm.
night would be a story. And if I can show your viewers something interesting, in fact, some of my first books was this Amar Chitra Kada. I still have I don't know how visible it is. Oh my God, tons and tons of this. A couple of them I bound and still kept. So there was this, if you're a kid who's grown up in the 80s, the Amar Chitra Katha was there in my house. I now don't recall whether it was a monthly or a weekly. So Amar Chitra Katha, Chanda Mama, Tinkle. I think that's where my first exposure to and uh, comics, these comics. And Amar Chitra Katha, if you've read it, most of our viewers, I don't know if they're Gen Z, etc. It's not known to them for sure, but it's very visually, beautifully depicted, and it'll have these characters easily where you can resonate, speak, and the
Yes.
beautifully done. So I think that's where my association with books and the fact that as a family, there would be this story time and stuff. So it started off that early, maybe if I had to put a age 5, 6, 8, whatever. Then of course
Mhm.
grew up into Hardy Boys and Famous Five, and and all of that. Then Mills and Boons also, and then somewhere I don't know, maybe uh, so between fiction non-fiction. Clearly, non-fiction is where I started moving. Then obviously,
Mhm.
initial phase I did my NIS Sparta. So
Mhm.
Philip Kotler, when I picked up, though they say it's heavy reading, I found it extremely, extremely magnificent in terms of market segmentation and so on and so forth, more from a marketing perspective, but
Right.
generally in terms of demographics, things that I could resonate with, things that I could see. Thereon, actually, after that, there's been no looking back. And then, of course, I'm in a profession that, needless to say, requires me to be well read and I mean, in terms of understanding perspective. So, yeah.
True. True. Lovely. Thanks for taking me through that nostalgic times because my father was traveling, and every time he comes back from his official trip, he would go and open that small briefcase. In those days, they would carry not a backpack like we carry nowadays. It would have a Chanda Mama, a Tinkle, and an Amar Chitrakatha. And today, as you have shown me, I have all bound books of Amar Chitrakathas. Chanda Mamas I don't have, but Tinkles I definitely have. So I could completely relate. I think you and me and others in our generation who were in the late 80s, 70s, mid 70s, we kind of grew with the Nid Blytons and Chanda Mamas and Tinkles and others of the world. I think amazing period, amazing period. Thanks for
True.
bringing those back. That takes me to the book of the day. Okay, and all of you, we're going to talk about this book, right? Upstream by Dan Heath. I think a classic book. And those of you who have not read this book should definitely, after the show and after listening to certain snippets that Sheila is going to talk about from this book, you should go to Amazon or any bookstore close by, pick up this book and read it. It's a classic. It tells you how can you be somebody looking at things from an upstream mindset and not from a downstream mindset. And what is upstream, what is downstream? Sheila is going to give us more insights about it. All right. On that note, Dan in the book, Sheila says, move from downstream to upstream. What is he communicating to all of us? Tell us briefly.
So simply put, prevention. We've all heard a stitch in time saves nine. Prevention better than, complete reaction. So he's talking of basically resolving a problem before even the problem happens. And I think he quotes so that's the fundamental approach. So I think the book starts beautifully with this, with these two boys, and they see people who are drowning, and they are jumping into the water and saving them until one of the boys says, hey, listen, let me go upstream and find out who is the one who's pushing them, or why is it that we have so many people who are fighting for their life? Why is it that they're falling into the water? And then, of course, it builds on a whole load of things, right from the industry that I'm in, for example. So that's what essentially, when you say, so he fundamentally says, look at not the destination but the direction. Because like we always advocate, right? If your input versus output metric, your what in your 5DX they call it lead versus lag measure, right? So basically, upstream thinking is to start looking at things which is more in terms of being able to take steps and not wait for a problem. The book, of course, dwells on why we don't do that, which of course I can't get into, but essentially that is what it really focuses on. A whole lot of examples. Like I said, just a simple one that I spoke about. And if I may add, why do we not look at upstream? Because downstream is easier to measure. And he's given again a very classic example in his book of a cop, and it happens in. I'm myself guilty of it, I must admit. When you cut the signal and then you have the cop standing there, and he'll cut a challan and say, now you have to pay. And there was this cop who apparently was standing ahead in his example, he's ahead of the signal, and basically, therefore, he was alerting. So when you see the cop, you're alert, and so you will not break the signal. Therefore, accidents came down drastically. However, at the end of the day, when the KPIs for both the cops was looked at, clearly the one who was cutting more challans emerged as a winner because he had so much more fee collection that he had done versus the target that the other cop was able to manage. Obviously, because he was standing ahead, and therefore there was no scope for people to. So that is what actually, is so beautiful. I think all of us just get consumed by that. And that is what he addresses in this book, saying, how is it that you look at the direction and not just the destination? That's what.
I think, thanks for that. I think the direction versus destination was a great insight for me also. I never looked at these two words from the kind of a perspective that Dan put it in the book. And it kind of gives you a very clear understanding that we have this convenience to take the easier route of staying in the downstream, right? And it's so much right and proactive actually. If you go upstream, you end up looking at things from a very early stage. I think interesting book.
Also, downstream is very heroic, because and that's what he says. It's easy to measure, like I said in this case, and what gets measured gets managed. It's as simple as that, right?
Absolutely, very true, very true. This also takes me to the next question, which I thought was very interesting. A phrase that he calls, and I want you to tell us, what do you mean by this word, combination of words called problem blindness? And he says, all of us have, most of us have, as a barrier that stops it from going upstream. What is your input to young leaders? How should they start looking at this blindness and overcome that?
Interesting question. So again, first, just to get your viewers to understand what problem blindness is essentially happens to all of us, and there are some 2 or 3 causal factors that cause it as per the book. So I'll first quote what happens in the book, what Dan is talking about, and then maybe share my perspective. The first thing, obviously, the obvious reason is the belief. But ये तो होना ही है, some amount of wastage, some amount of pilferage, dissatisfied customers, they're all bound to be there, right? So there is this belief. And then again, in his book, there is a beautiful example of how this belief kind of manifests. And you kind of go with the flow, saying that this is bound to happen. If I have a big day sale at Amazon, and there is going to be, or a big day sale at Flipkart, which I think a couple of years back, and loads and loads of traffic, obviously system failure to hone hi wala. So you go by the belief that it is inevitable. And in his book, there is this beautiful example that again he quotes about this sports coach. Yeah, the sports coach. In one of the things we all know, players not playing in certain matches, certain important matches, players staying back because of an injury. And it's a given that sports mein to ye hota rehta hai. So, however, there was this coach who realized that yes, but we can definitely do something about it. Now, what he realized was there are certain body types, right, who are more prone to injury versus certain other body types.
Okay.
That's what this coach beautifully did. What he did is he investigated and understood the body type. So if it's a Rajiv versus a Sheila, depending on muscle strength and various other parameters, if you have a particular fall, the probability of an injury versus I have a particular fall in a particular angle, the probability of injury is different. Now, by virtue of that, he was able to custom make the trainings. So, as part of your trainings before an important competition, what happens is you receive a training where your susceptibility to injury comes down considerably, and it's not like a one size fits all. So we all come to the training camp, but then we undergo training which is more attuned to my body type and which will not injure me before a match. So I thought that was a brilliant. So one is to just accept and go with the flow, saying this is how it's going to happen. So one is the whole belief thing. Then he talks of something called as inattentional blindness and habituation, which is essentially just like the phrase says it. So right now there is an AC sound happening at the background, and I'm habituated to it, and I'm thinking ye to aise hi hona hai.
Right.
And also the fact that I'm so consumed in doing something that I'm not able to see the periphery. I'm not able to see that this will cause. Like, for example, all of us are talking climate change today, Rajiv. We're seeing a lot of things, but are we really, really there? Right?
Yeah.
We know that certain actions of ours is going to be contributing. What are we doing? So I think somewhere we're so consumed by certain things we ourselves are doing. Like in between, I know there was this huge hue and cry about the use of plastic and certain, but I see, at least in Mumbai, I don't know about Bangalore and other cities, it's come back again. The vendors are still giving you a plastic bag. Now, I don't know for reasons best known, and I'd like to believe it's the same grade which was of plastic which was prohibited. So that's the second factor. And the third interesting factor that he talks about is he calls it political in nature, in the sense sometimes we just go with the flow, and in the problem lies our interests. And a very classic example that he's given in his book, which I really liked, was the cesarean or the C-section that we call for women, which in an era became very, very popular. And it was somewhere where it was hand in gloves. When you say hand in gloves, obviously the pregnant lady, as in the mother who has to deliver the baby, found it far more easier, because she said, okay, I will not have to go through the pain. So half the selling was done there. But then there was another fraternity, which is the doctors, who clearly knew that, there are going to be pros and cons. Yes, it's required where it's required, but should that be the way of life? Well, it just made it interesting to make it a way of life, because everything was planned. I don't have to mess up my holidays. I don't have to work overnight. There are no frantic calls. I plan, I do my tour. I get paid more. So where I have to do 10 deliveries, what I earn, probably I earn out of 2 planned ones. So I think some of it, like for example, customers in our industry, right? In the kind of industry that I'm in, you take great pride in saying that customer satisfaction scores kitna hua, yeah, attrition. How did you manage? The language is always attrition ka kya hua? What did you? How have you managed your attrition? We are not talking of how have you managed your engagement. How have you managed your ESAT? Right?
Nice one.
Those are not questions which are asked. Predominantly, the question is, and even as a metric, which is where the lead in lag. What I'm looking for is how good or bad you are on attrition. And I'm not looking at, it's a given. You know, I'm not looking at engagement. I'm not looking at ESAT. Can I put ESAT on your KPI? Maybe I can, but I don't want to look at it right now.
Correct.
Right? So I think, yeah, systemic in nature. So problem blindness collectively, that's why he talks about system thinking. All of us in the system, somewhere, in some form and shape, are culprits to it, both leaders as well as doers, as well as, I mean, if I were to talk of a corporate setup, but these are the three causal factors for problem blindness.
Which is the one that you think the young leader should immediately pick up and start working, as per you?
So if you ask me, I think it is about, you know, the one where, like I said, to start when you in your reviews, etc. So out of when you are reviewing somebody, what are you looking for? Are you looking at the output measure or the input measure, or are you talking both? Are you rewarding behaviors or are you rewarding results only at the cost of being? Yeah, I think for us, for example, Rajiv, I know we've definitely moved. That's the way you move up the value chain. Today, nobody talks of our organization as a BPO or a call center. We say we are customer experience. Or one important metric these days across the IT service domain is being spoken about is customer effort, which is more upstream. People, gone are the days when you would say how many complaints you resolved, etc. You're saying that today you talk of customer effort and omni-channel experience, which means from the time Rajiv enters my system till he goes, whether it's an IVR, whether it's somebody that he talks to, whether he fills 2 forms, how seamless has this, and what's if that whole thing has just taken him, like, let's say a minute and a half, that's improvement in terms of customer experience. So I think I'd like to believe that as an industry, we're moving there. So leaders have to start thinking like that. One quick action that they can all take, according to me, is as young leaders, when you're reviewing or when you're presenting, either ways, start talking the language of input, direction, process, and outcomes, and not just outcome and backtracking. That's fundamentally
very true. I think very powerful point, because young leaders need to start moving towards the lead side than staying on the lag side, right? At least you can do something about it. Very well. Thank you so much. That was well answered. I'm going to take you to the next one, which was very interesting for me, and I'm going to talk about this particular thought, which was very interesting when I read it, and I don't have absolute clarity on it, so I'll seek clarity from you. This is one area which I still have some questions. We talk about a concept called point of leverage. What does it mean, and how does one reach that point, and why should somebody reach the point? Some explanation on that would really help.
Yeah, that's quite a concept over there. In fact, yes. So point of leverage is simply answers one question, one basic question, Rajiv. Where do I begin my upstream efforts? I could see 10 different places. Where do I begin my upstream efforts? Because where I begin will then involve a lot of other questions in terms of who I get in, how I do it. But where do I begin? Which is that point which will give me a head start in terms of my upstream efforts, right? In the book, there is this example of, I think, alcohol abuse, which is happening amongst teenagers somewhere in Iceland. So beautifully, what he explains is his first thing was he also saw that these youngsters, I mean, the researchers who were conducting the research in the problem, saw that they play a lot of football, but of course unorganized, like your gully cricket. These boys were just playing. Now, what they realized was alcohol abuse or whatever was happening was generally for them to get a high. Okay, they just wanted to, for reasons best known to these youngsters, they wanted to shy away from reality. They wanted to be on a high. So they said, okay, there is something that they're doing, which is playing football, right? Can I use that as my point of leverage? And then begin, how is it that I get them to play more, get them to have a more organized play and not just play in the. So that's how the leagues started. So they onboarded right from parents to sponsors to league. But the point where they began was not to say that acha, alcohol abuse is happening. Where is my upstream effort? Where can I begin? I can begin my upstream effort by ensuring I channelize their
Ah,
need for getting a high. That need still needs to be catered to, but I need to
hmm.
channelize that in this direction by leveraging the fact that they love this game called football.
So that point of leverage can also be an alteration that somebody can look at, or can also be an alternative that somebody can look at.
An alteration and an alternative that somebody can look at. Yes, yes.
Hmm.
So what is
Hmm.
going to be, because otherwise when you say upstream effort, like we're talking like in right in, I mean, I don't know whether this is the right example, but our own prime minister, and of course, without trying to get any political angle to it, but I think there was a whole thing when this Swachh Bharat and this whole toilets. I mean, talking about
Yeah.
uh, public defecation and the fact that it should stop immediately, and we need so many, so on and so forth. Now, to me, that's a point of leverage, because if you're
Hmm.
talking about basic sanitation hygiene, where do I begin my upstream efforts? Swachh
Yeah.
Bharat to meko chahiye, but then where do I begin my upstream efforts? I by understanding that this is an important requirement, and I'll be able to mobilize people to start using, obviously for safety, health, there were other reasons, and it became easy to sell this point of leverage, saying, okay, for what you first need is every house needs a toilet which is there within the house. So to
Right.
me, that becomes the point of leverage where I begin my upstream efforts.
Beautiful example. I think you also made a point while narrating that, and I'm thinking now that it's not only about identifying a point of leverage, it's also should be something that's easily saleable.
Correct. Correct.
Because you need acceptance by the community to pick up things from that point on the upstream and move towards upstream, right? Because the moment you say upstream, you're kind of moving against something.
Correct.
Yeah, so acceptability becomes very important. That's a very powerful point that you said. I never thought from that angle. Yeah,
Mhm.
actually.
And I think as practitioners, for us, at least, I don't know whether you resonate with the same, but as LNOD, the typical question of, I think COVID to some extent was a game changer, but even today,
Hmm.
somewhere we are in that juncture where we are still answering questions on, I mean, maybe we moved away from ROI, but, whether it's upskilling, reskilling, the whole idea of give me something tangible, give me
Yeah,
something. And upstream, that's where the struggle is. It's not, so then
right.
you, what you resort to is you slip to then downstream because it becomes easier, right?
Yeah.
I think this is what the point of leverage does. It helps you kind of needle that and nail it and say, okay, this is where I can, and this is how I can. This the saleable point, of course, is something that I added because I think that's something that we all do need, and we do struggle with, right? As
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
to be able to, yeah.
Right. I think that's a powerful point that you added from your side. That concept makes absolute sense. Yeah. Uh, I'm going to ask you an experience that you had of how did you move upstream, and what was that one struggle that you had, and how did you battle that? That'll be a good experience to share for young leaders. Talk about one that happened. I'm sure, as you said, LNOD, you and me have been battling for
Yeah,
almost 2 decades to give
and for
ROI, etc. And we succeed, we sometimes not succeed. Tell me anything that happened.
true. So I mean, honestly, all our efforts are upstream, like you rightly said. But if you were to share something specific, when I joined the organization, I remember way back. This is my 11th year, but so there was this whole dilemma saying we need. So we wanted to mobilize a lot of internal talent. We wanted a certain build and buy ratio. Uh, and what we also started, and as an industry, we were, as an industry, collectively, we struggle with attrition levels compared to other industries, right?
Very
For,
true.
for reasons best known to everyone. So, in short, let me just tell you that what happened was so if I'm a healthcare, or if I'm in retail, or if I'm in banking, right? What happens is at the first supervisory level, it becomes easier for talent to move from frontline to frontline supervisor within the same domain. In fact, forget the same domain, within the same domain, within my business, within my line of business, because then you are an expert and I can, you are plug and play for me. Uh, like I said, but parallelly, what was happening is the industry was moving from just a cost arbitrage. The idea is, what is the value added service that you're able to give me as a vendor when I'm, or at least we wanted to move up the value chain. So these two things were juxtaposed. So then I remember sharing this thought, saying that can we not cross pollinate talent? Can we not have a retail person going into a banking or a healthcare? And I remember the first, and this I tabled initially in a very small forum with the internal, and they were like, "What's wrong with you? Do you even realize?" But trust me, and I'm not going to walk you through the entire process. Of course, there was a lot of, and so to your point, what does it? Another thing that he advocates, and which I thought is important, the point of leverage is SENE point of leverage. Pata chalta. You can't make that. You need to immerse yourself in the problem. So, and now with the plethora of data that's available and the enormous amount of knowledge, it's easy, but you should know what you're trying to look for.
True.
So I remember it took multiple iterations. Of course, I sowed the seed, and then of course it went through debates. But the initial reaction was absolutely ready, short of saying just there's the door and you can walk out. Absurd, but happy to share that. Of course, my leaders stepped in, and then it took its own shape and pattern and whatever. That within the same year when the program was launched, again relaunched, there was data enough to say we can try this for 20% of the talent mobility that we're looking at. And we had some great success stories, and I'm talking of something which happened way back in 2014-15. Okay, it's been, but it's a clearly, because at that time that transition was very, very. But then this 15, 10, 20% odd leaders whom we managed to mobilize into other verticals did a phenomenal job, Rajiv. But the whole ordeal was to look at data, handhold. It had its own, and then they realized that yes, there was merit in, and today, of course, it's become the way of life. But there was something that they were completely blocked, or they said it's just not going to happen. Yes, so upstream efforts there for sure.
I think one success story of an upstream effort, when organizations see, they realize the importance of moving upstream, and then you get the permission or the elbow room to move upstream. And if departments and leaders and organizations start doing this as a way of life, I think it will be a great benefit for many organizations, especially departments and organizations that are trying to become this market-oriented enterprise. In that effort to become that, I think upstream is the only way to do it. Downstream is not going to
It's
take
not
the
good.
merit.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Great point. I'm going to ask you the last question. So, with all the years of experience, Sheila, that we have, 2 bullseye advice to young leaders listening to you. Keep it bullseye.
Okay, this is the advisory mode becomes very, very honestly challenging for me, but nonetheless, I'll give it a shot. One, of course, like they say, what's that? Give a man a fish and he will eat today. Teach him how to fish and he will eat every day. Somewhere as a parallel to that, I think for young leaders, it's about getting your folks to also start thinking, seeing upstream, because that's not how we are innately wired. So first is, do you, like I said, whether you're sitting for a review, whether you're giving a presentation yourself, one, start talking the upstream language.
Beautiful.
Which means look at the input, talk about the input, spend time. So actually divide your meeting agenda or your this thing and say, this is the time, and start talking that language and ensure you're creating that system where the culture is attuned, where your folks can talk that.
Beautiful. Second one.
That for sure. That is the first one. And second is, it takes, problem blindness is bound to be there. It's bound to be there. I think, especially if I were to talk of corporate, a couple of it, we are all, sometimes we succumb to. I'm talking of the political piece, right? While I may be a partner in crime, and I may be a partner in crime knowingly or unknowingly. Often somewhere, I think we do get we know it. So I'd like to believe it never happens. Very rare cases maybe, but what does it take to then stand up and say, hey, no, this is not how it will work, or here is my perspective. Don't shy away from putting that point at the right time and in the right forum when you get the place. When you are given a forum, when you are there, Don't say, oh, this is how it's been happening. How can I even say, or how will it? I think, again, being able to say, this is how I look at upstream, this is where I
Mm,
see our direction is wrong, or our
mm,
direction could improve.
mm.
Making that call when you see it, and not saying, let me go with the flow of the system, because,
Yeah.
the belief is that's how it will happen in any case. I think that is important. That takes a lot of courage, effort, and being able to hold one's ground. I know it's easier said than done, but yeah, these two things for sure.
Very true. I think very, very true. These two make sense because among these two, I like the first one a lot, as you rightly said. It's not about you going upstream, but creating a culture of everybody thinking to move upstream.
Yeah,
Then you've made it a way of life in your team or your
correct.
department, right? Then I think overall the system starts moving on. Yeah.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Sheila, for taking this time. I completely enjoyed this conversation. It was
So did I.
insightful. I hope you had a good time.
I enjoyed Rajiv, because you read and then you get to kind of discuss. It was wonderful. It's very interesting. I think some questions were well thought through. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this. It was lovely chatting on this book with you. Yeah. You have a good evening. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.